It began as a small settlement beside a river, a cluster of huts on 7 hills along the Tiber. No one looking at it in the 8th century BCE would have predicted that this modest city Rome would one day dominate 3 continents. Yet from these hills rose one of the most powerful empires the world has ever known. This is the story of Rome's expansion, how a republic of farmers became masters of the Mediterranean. Rome's early history is shrouded in legend, but we know its kings were overthrown around 509 BC. In their place rose a new system, the Republic. Power would not rest in the hands of one ruler, but in elected magistrates, and a senate dominated by the city's aristocratic families. But this young republic had a serious problem. It was surrounded by enemies. To survive, Rome had to fight, and to fight, it had to grow stronger. Rome's first expansions were cautious and local. Through a brutal mix of warfare, strategic alliances, and the clever granting of citizenship, Rome began to subdue its neighbors, the Latin tribes, the Etruscans to the north, and the fierce Samnites in the mountains. But Rome did something remarkable. It didn't just crush its enemies, it absorbed them. Defeated cities were often offered partial rights and the protection of the growing Roman state. Roads were built to connect these new territories. Colonies were founded, and soldiers were given land in newly conquered areas, solidifying Roman control. V 270 BCE. After centuries of conflict, Rome controlled the entire Italian peninsula. But for an ambitious republic, Italy was not enough. Across the sea lay a rival, a superpower that would test Rome to its very limits. In North Africa stood the mighty city of Carthage, a naval and trading empire that controlled the seas. The clash between Rome and Carthage would define the next century in a series of conflicts, known as the Punic Wars. The First Punic War forced Rome, a land-based power, to build a massive navy from scratch. Against all odds, they mastered naval warfare and defeated Carthage at sea. But the Second Punic War nearly destroyed Rome completely. A Carthaginian general of legendary genius, Hannibal Barca, marched an army complete with war elephants across the treacherous Alps and into Italy. For over a decade, he ravaged the countryside, inflicting devastating defeats on the Roman legions. Armies fell one after another, most famously at the Battle of Cannae. But Rome refused to surrender. Instead, it adapted. It learned from its mistakes and produced a commander to match Hannibal, a young general named Scipio. Scipio took the fight to North Africa, forcing Hannibal to return and defend his home. In 202 BCE, at the Battle of Zama, Scipio defeated Hannibal, and Carthage was broken. Rome was now the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean, and its appetite for conquest was only growing. With the West secured, Rome turned its attention east, toward the wealthy, sophisticated kingdoms of Greece and Asia Minor. These were the successor states of Alexander the Great's empire, rich in culture, trade, and resources. One by one, they fell to the relentless efficiency of the Roman legions. Macedonia, the homeland of Alexander, was conquered. Greece, the cradle of Western philosophy and art, was subdued. The vast Seleucid Empire was humbled and pushed back. By the middle of the 2nd century BC, Rome's dominion stretched from the shores of Spain all the way to Asia Minor. The Mediterranean Sea was no longer a collection of competing territories. It became, in the Roman mindset, Mare Nostrum, our sea, a torrent of gold, grain, slaves, and new ideas flowed into the city of Rome. But this incredible expansion came with severe consequences. The immense new wealth saved labor from conquered lands, displaced small farmers, who lost their land and flocked to the city, creating an unstable urban population. Political tensions soared as the old republican system struggled to manage a sprawling overseas empire. Rome was growing more powerful, and at the same time, more unstable. In this volatile climate, a new kind of leader emerged. Ambitious generals whose loyalty lay not with the Senate back in Rome, but with the professional armies they commanded. The most famous of these was Gaius Julius Caesar. Between 58 and 50 BC, Caesar conquered all of Galaneria, covering modern-day France and beyond. His victories brought him immense wealth, glory, and the undying loyalty of his legions. The Senate, fearing his power, ordered him to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar faced a fateful choice. He crossed the Rubicon River with his troops, a clear act of rebellion and the beginning of a civil war. He famously declared, "The die is cast." Caesar emerged victorious, brushing aside his rivals and declaring himself dictator for life. He began a series of sweeping reforms, but his ambition was too much for a city that had thrown out its kings centuries before. Rome feared absolute power. In 44 BCE, on the Ides of March, a group of senators assassinated him, hoping to restore the Republic. Instead, they plunged it into another round of chaos and bloody civil war. The Republic was dying. Out of the turmoil rose Caesar's adopted son and heir, a young man named Octavian. He was clever, patient, and politically brilliant. Over more than a decade, he systematically outmaneuvered and defeated his rivals, including his former ally, Mark Antony and the Egyptian queen Cleopatra. After his final victory, Octavian returned to Rome and, in a masterful political move, claimed to be restoring the Republic. In reality, he created something entirely new: the Empire. Taking the name Augustus, he became Rome's first emperor, holding absolute power behind a facade of republican tradition. Under Augustus, Rome's expansion continued. He annexed Egypt, securing its vital grain supply to feed the population of Rome. His campaigns pushed Roman borders deeper into Spain and the Balkans. The Roman legions were transformed into permanent, professional forces, stationed along the vast frontiers of the empire. His long reign ushered in an era of unprecedented stability and prosperity known as the Pax Roman peace. For nearly 2 centuries, the empire experienced relative tranquility and continued, though more methodical, expansion. The empire eventually stretched from the misty highlands of Britain to the scorching deserts of Mesopotamia. In the north, Roman forces conquered much of Britain. Under Emperor Hadrian, a massive wall was built across the island, a stark line marking the edge of the Roman world, a boundary between order and what they saw as barbarian chaos. In the east, emperors like Trajan expanded Rome to its greatest territorial extent, conquering Dacia, Romania, and pushing deep into Mesopotamia. At its height, the Roman Empire covered over 5 million square kilometers and ruled more than 60 million people. An incredible network of roads connected distant provinces. Massive aqueducts carried fresh water across valleys to supply cities. The Latin language and Roman law became common across this vast area. But this expansion had reached its limits. The borders grew too long and too difficult to defend. Powerful enemies pressed in from all sides, and ruling such a vast and diverse territory required more than just legions. It required stability at home. As the centuries passed, the cracks in the imperial structure began to show. The empire faced crippling economic strain, endless political corruption, and a rapid, often violent, turnover of emperors. The frontiers that had once seemed so secure were repeatedly breached by Germanic tribes in the north and the revitalized Persian Empire in the east. In a desperate attempt to manage the crisis, Emperor Diocletian made a radical decision. He divided the empire into eastern and western halves, each with its own ruler. It was an attempt to make the vast territory more governable, to preserve Rome's greatness. But in the long run, the division only highlighted its weakness. In 476 CE, the Western Roman Empire finally collapsed under the immense pressure of economic decay and invading forces. The eastern half, later known as the Byzantine Empire, would endure for nearly another 1,000 years. The expansion of Rome completely reshaped the ancient world. It spread concepts of engineering, law, language, architecture, and governance across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Great cities rose where legions had once marched. The roads they built for conquest became the arteries of commerce and communication, and even after the empire itself fell, its influence endured. Modern legal systems in the West still echo the principles of Roman law. Languages like Spanish, French, Italian, and Romanian are direct descendants of Latin. The very idea of a republic and a senate would inspire future revolutions thousands of years later. Rome's expansion was never just about conquering land. It was about spreading an idea of a unified, ordered, and civilized world. Under Roman rule, from a small settlement on the Tiber to the rulers of the known world, Rome's journey was fueled by ambition, discipline, and a remarkable ability to adapt. It conquered, but it also absorbed. It destroyed, but it also built. And though the physical empire eventually fell, its shadow still stretches across the landscape of our history. Because Rome did not simply expand, it transformed the world. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this journey through history, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more stories like this one. We'll see you next time.